And I like to get started on time so we can end on time. So I would like to say to everyone, welcome to the Accessing the Georgia Milestones. It's resources and strategies for math constructed responses and extended responses. This is the ninth grade session number 1. I am Sue Wanda Coffey, the math mentor here at West Georgia RESA. I would like to thank you for joining me this afternoon, this magnificent Monday. I would like to start off, of course, by just telling you the purpose of the webinars that we'll be offering through West Georgia RESA. It is basically just to provide to any new teacher or even veteran teachers that may be new to a content area, just another resource that you all can use to reference when you are actually trying to identify item types that are going to be structured in the same manner as the Georgia milestones that our students will be seeing in the spring. Due to the time frame of the webinars, I will have to pretty much advise you that we will only be able to review maybe 1 to 2 assessment items. This is the initial month of these webinars. So of course, the initial month, I'm only able to actually review one assessment item with you. The series, of course, are about 30 minutes each. They are offered for the grades 3 through 10 grade levels and, of course, the high school levels. So, of course, I'm asking anyone that joins us if you know of any of your other coworkers or any friends and family that teach those content areas, just ask them to register for the webinars. If you are not able to actually join us each month, that is okay. And we'll talk more about how you gain access to the webinars when you're not able to actually join them on those days. The basic format of the webinars is pretty much the same for all grade levels. I will be providing a standard of the month. Also, I'll provide, of course, the assessment item itself, and I will also align the standards for mathematical practice to the assessment item that we will review in the session. And along with that, I'll also try to provide some scored student work for you. Okay, the norms for the webinars is, of course, if you notice, you are muted during the presentation, and this is just to decrease on the background noise that we may experience as we go throughout the session. Next, you may type in questions during the presentation. If you have any questions, feel free to type those in. If I'm not able to answer the questions during the webinar, then of course I'll just compile those and provide answers to you via email, because the 30 minutes do go by pretty fast. And of course, at the end of each of the presentations, there will be a link to the recording uploaded to the West Georgia RESA site. To access the link from the home page, there is a services tab, and up under the services tab, you will see recorded webinars. So if you've missed any of the other grade levels for this month, then you can always visit that link and review those at your leisure. Just quickly about, just a recap of the expectation for the Georgia milestones when it just talks about the item types. There are 3 item types. And like I said, this is a range from 3 through 10. So it may be referencing specific grade levels as far as the types. But we know that all students will experience that multiple choice section or that selected response. We will also see constructed response for some ELA and some mathematics courses or grade levels, as well as extended response for ELA and mathematics. So just be on the lookout for those. But for the purpose of the webinars, most of the questions will be constructed response types of assessment items. Okay, the standard and the lesson essential question that will be provided each session as well. That's related to the assessment item that we're going to be reviewing. So for this particular month, the standard is F.LE.5. It says interpret the parameters in a linear or exponential function in terms of a context. Well, for the assessment item for today, we will only be talking about interpreting the parameters in an exponential function in terms of a context. And then the lesson essential question is, how do we interpret parameters in an exponential function within a given real world context? Now, what I've done is I've highlighted some vocabulary. We're going to talk more about that when we talk about the standards for mathematical practice. But, this is an opportunity to, have that discussion with your students about that vocabulary that they will encounter or that you've explicitly taught. Okay, with the standards for mathematical practice, hopefully we are all very familiar with these, and we are already integrating those into our classes. But as I stated before, I will be aligning the standards for mathematical practice to the assessment item of the month. So for this item, the standard that we're going to start off with is standard 1. And this should be a standard that we should demonstrate as teachers every single time that we actually teach a lesson in our classes. And this standard says, make sense of problems and persevere in solving them. So along with the standards, I am also providing some teacher behaviors and some student behaviors that you can actually demonstrate. And of course, we want you to encourage your students to demonstrate those as well. The first teacher behavior is we want to provide rich problems aligned to the standards. And I'll talk about the TEKS and how this particular, or the teacher behaviors and the student behaviors, align to that in just a second. The second teacher behavior we would like to see is, of course, provide an appropriate time for students to engage in productive struggle of problem solving. We do have some teachers that, hate to, allow the students to have that time to think through the process, or just to allow them just to struggle a little bit and to kind of get frustrated. And, we should know when to actually step in and help them at that time. But it's okay to allow them to do that. Now, some questions that you may ask as the teacher is, how is Wade's blank of solving a problem like or different than yours? And does your plan make sense? Why not? If you ask this type of question in your class, we, of course, would like for our students to be able to articulate their answer in writing. That would be a very good component to incorporate into our lessons each time. Have our students to write. We want them to, be able to carry out their thought processes in complete sentences. Now, some student behaviors that are related to this standard is, of course, checking answers and making sure solutions are reasonable and make sense. This can be done individually, or it can be done with a partner. It's kind of whichever one you would like to see demonstrated. Another student behavior is discussing the meaning of the problem with classmates. I just kind of spoke about that, even when they're checking their answers, and just checking to see if their answer is reasonable and makes sense. Having that dialogue between two students, it can help each one of the students. One, if a student is struggling, and then if they hear the answer explained from someone else, then they could maybe rethink their process. The next standard that's related to this one is standard number 2, and it says reason abstractly and quantitatively. And some teacher behaviors that are related to standard number 2 is providing a variety of problems in different contexts that allow students to arrive at a solution in different ways. If you are able to, find out what your students are interested in, and then actually finding problems that are related to their interests, then of course that will really, keep your students engaged. And then you can kind of see what their thought process is for that content that you're teaching. The next teacher behavior would be thinking aloud strategies, as the teacher, as you model the problem solving. Just take time out to allow the students to actually listen to how you would go about tackling a problem. Teacher questions that you may ask your students is, what does the number blank represent in the problem? If they're able to actually, just identify what the numbers are in the problem, and maybe how they can take that number and maybe assign it to a symbol, or maybe just come up with another totally number sentence, then that's great. Another question that you may ask is, can you make a chart, a table, or graph from whatever the information is provided inside of the assessment item? Some student behaviors that we would want to definitely encourage our students to demonstrate in the class is taking quantities out of context to work with them. And we're going to actually see how this is done in the assessment item for today. And of course, putting quantities back in context to see if they make sense. And we see is one of them as decontextualizing and the other one is contextualizing. So once again, we'll see that demonstrated in the assessment item for today. And the last standard for mathematical practice that we should also demonstrate in our classes every single day is attend to precision. And teacher behaviors that are related to that is explicitly teaching mathematics vocabulary. As I stated before, when we were going through the standard and the lesson essential question, I highlighted some vocabulary that I could explicitly teach to my students before we even get started with the lesson to help them out. Insisting on accurate use of academic language from students using complete sentences. We definitely, once again, want to encourage our students to always, be able to articulate their thought process as they go throughout trying to answer the question. And if they can do that in complete sentences, then they will be working on their thought process and their actual skills of thinking. And also that's related to ELA as well. Some teacher questioning that we also may want to ask is, what does the word mean? Explain what you did to solve the problem. We will see this as one of a problem solving strategy that we could use is, like I said, just having them to go back and express that vocabulary in their own words. Student behaviors is communicating precisely using clear language and accurate mathematics vocabulary. Once again, we want to definitely always encourage our students, to use the vocabulary that we've explicitly taught them and use it correctly. Deciding when to estimate or give an exact answer. Okay. Let's look at the assessment item for today. It says the breakdown of a sample of a chemical compound is represented by the function P of T is equal to 300 times 0.5 to the T power, where P of T represents the number of milligrams of the substance and T represents the time in years. In the function P of T, explain what 0.5 and 300 represent. Now, before we look at some strategies and look at some student score at work, each month, what I will be highlighting is a resource of the month. It will be a recommended resource that the Georgia DOE has provided. And this month I'm highlighting assessment items from Engage New York. I will provide that link at the end of the presentation for you all to actually, use and to go back if you haven't been familiar with it already. Okay, before we actually address the assessment item, some strategies that we may use, and I will definitely say up front that this is not the problem-solving framework. I'm sure as educators, we have used things that have been effective in our classrooms. And if you have done that, please share that with me so I can share that with others. They may not be aware of what you are using that has been effective. But this problem-solving framework has been adapted from Robert Kaplinski. I attended a conference that he conducted about a couple of months ago, and this was the framework that he provided, and we'll see how it works. What problem are you trying to figure out? Of course, that is the actual question that's in the item that you're providing to your students. What guesses do you have? Now, this is one of those strategies that I have to kind of explain. Once again, if you're not familiar with it, but with the guesses, we want to encourage all of our students to be active participants in our room. We want them to always feel like, their work is valued. So with the guesses is, if you identify the question, we just want students to, take a guess at what the answer could be. Nobody is right or wrong at this point in time. We just want to solicit answers from the class. So once again, that's getting everybody to participate. So how this one strategy would work is you would take the first answer from a student and say, for instance, their guess for this particular item was 15. And you want to start polling the class and asking students, how many students have an answer that is lower than 15? And you want to continue to do that until you have the lowest answer. So say if that lowest answer was 5. Now you want to do the same thing for students that may have answers that are greater than 15. And once again, you continue to do this until you have the highest answer. And so say if that answer was 25. So now you can say to your class, okay, class, we know that our answer is somewhere between 5 and 25. And once again, it's not necessarily who's right, who's wrong. It's just to encourage more dialogue in our classes. Next is, what do you already know from the problem? This is specific information that's provided to you in the problem. So you're just actually picking this out and writing that down. Next is, what do you need to know to solve the problem? Once again, this is where our standard for mathematical practice may come into play. Is if a student can tell you what they need to know in order to solve the problem, then you know they have an idea of maybe how they go about answering that. Next is, what should we title this problem and lesson? Some people may wonder, why is this here? But if you follow the process, then what we are asking at this time is just, okay, to bring a focus back to the problem. Like we, want to title it. And the title will probably be something very similar to the question that's being asked. What are we about to answer? Provide all your work while working on a problem. I would definitely encourage us to, if we are going to use this particular framework, is provide space where our students can actually write down any thoughts that they have, any and all of their work that is going to help them answer this question. And lastly, what is your conclusion? And what we want to do with this particular question is, we want to have the students to complete their process of answering the question in complete sentences, having a space for them to do that and asking them, how did you reach that conclusion? But all of this is done using complete sentences. Now, once again, like I said, this particular framework or problem solving framework is not the end, is not the be all for everything, but I do want to share that this can be used in all aspects of our classes, whether we want to use it with a whole group, whether we want to use it with small group, if we want to use it individually on skill work, as well as the performance tasks that are provided to us through the Georgia DOE frameworks. This example rubric that we're about to review is once again from Engage New York. It is their 2-point holistic rubric that they use to score student work. So if a student scores 2 points, then that pretty much says that the response indicates that the student has completed the task correctly. It contains sufficient work to demonstrate a thorough understanding of the mathematical concepts. And, it may contain inconsequential errors, but it does not distract from the correct solution. If a student scores a 1 point, then what the response is pretty much saying that, they correctly addresses only some elements of the task. It may contain an incorrect solution, but it does apply a mathematically appropriate process. That means they were actually carried out the answer in a logical manner. And so it was, understood that they knew what was going on. And lastly, it may contain the correct solution, but required work is incomplete. And lastly, if a student scores a 0, then their response is pretty much incorrect, is irrelevant, or incoherent. And if you're looking at the elements, it may contain correct mathematical procedures, but holistically, it does not provide a good demonstration that the student knew what the mathematical concepts were in the task. Now, hopefully, as we go through the student scored work, I always ask that, as the educator and as a teacher and just as good practice, we answer the question just to see if we are able to answer them. And then we'll actually look at how the student answered and then the response that was provided. So once again, the question was, the breakdown of a sample of chemical compound is represented by the function P of t equals 300 times 0.5 raised to the t power, where P of t represents the number of milligrams of the substance and t represents the time in years. In the function P of t, explain what 0.5 and 300 represent. Well, this student scored 2 points out of 2. And we can see with the explanation, because that's what they are primarily asked for, is to explain. So this student's response was 300 represents the original amount of the chemical that was to begin with, and 0.5 represents the rate of decay. And as we also go through the assessment items and the scored student work, just think about the standards for mathematical practice that we discussed earlier, and how would you be able to provide maybe additional feedback that was provided than what's provided here. It's always good to practice what we want to demonstrate in the classes before we actually do those in the class. All right, this student scored 1 out of 2 points. And let's look at their response. They say that 300 is the number at which it starts at, and 0.5 is the percent of rate the number 300 goes up by. And the feedback that was provided to the student is it gave a correct explanation for 300, but the explanation of 0.5 is incorrect. So we see that if a student is able to answer a portion of it, then of course they deserve to have some point value assigned to it. And scores student work for student number 3. Let's look at their response. They represent over to the side. We see where they have T is time in years, and then P is for milligrams. So their response is 0.5 represents the milligrams and 300 represents the time in years. And of course, the entire response is just completely incorrect. So once again, if we want to become better at integrating these constructive responses into our classes, then we want to also practice what we want to do. So you can always take some of these sample assessment items and just think about what students may say, or actually give them this question and then see what the answers are. And then, of course, use your own rubric to grade them on. I've seen lately where some teachers are actually creating their rubrics with their classes and not just, just finding some off the internet. And the students have been more responsive to that process because they know up front what is expected of them. Okay, and lastly, let's talk about feedback. Written and verbal feedback must be given frequently. I am a huge supporter of feedback because in this day and time, we are currently in the midst of TKES. And so what we want to do is we want to know the feedback that has been provided to us from the administrators. So I think that the students deserve the same right to have that feedback from the teacher. And it, once again, it can be written or verbal, but I think it should definitely be frequently. Feedback must be provided to tell the student their next steps and moving towards mastering the standard. If you're going to provide this, then it should definitely be written feedback, providing what is it that the student needs to do in order to move to the next step to either gain mastery or come closer to mastering the standard. And lastly, use the language of the standards when providing that feedback. Once again, being familiar with your standards, knowing exactly what it is that the student's supposed to know and be able to do by the end of that particular lesson or even that unit. But when we provide that feedback, please, start practicing using the language of the standards when you provide that feedback to them. And as I stated before at the beginning, I like to start on time so we can end on time. And this is just a reference page. And I'm just highlighting once again a resource of the month, and I'm not providing multiple resources in one session just because I want teachers to be able to go out and actually go back and reference the resource and get familiar with it throughout the month before introducing another one. So by the end of the year, you have multiple resources that you can reference back to when it's time to start prepping your students. Another reference, of course, is the Georgia Frameworks. This is another area or another place that we can go to actually access the extended response type of items. You can use those performance tasks, pieces of them as constructed response, or you can use the entire one and they can be extended response types of items. And of course, as a disclaimer, the webinars that we provide here at West Georgia RESA are not in lieu of what the Georgia DOE has on their websites for us as well. They have created these webinars that are for elementary, middle, and high school, where you can also see some additional resource items as well as a different rubric that they use and some actually scored student work as well. So I thank you again. If you have any questions, then please, enter those. If not, you can always email me at your leisure. But definitely, once again, if you're using a framework, a problem-solving framework that you want to share with everyone, please send that to me so I can send it to others, because there may be teachers out there that may not have access to or may not have come across that. So, and I don't see any questions. So I thank you again, and I want you to have a magnificent Monday.